I was 15 the night my mom played a recording of me talking in my sleep, murmuring about a boy I liked from chemistry class, and made me stand in front of an empty chair to confess my sins. The entire family sat around like it was Sunday dinner, except nobody was eating, just watching, judging. She paused the audio right after I said his name and smiled like a televangelist. "Secrets make sinners," she told me, "and I'm saving your soul." That was last summer. Yesterday, she tried to swallow a USB drive in a courtroom packed with lawyers, social workers, and strangers. Right there, in front of the judge. But that wasn't even the craziest part. To explain how we ended up there, I need to rewind to when we still lived in Lakewood, Ohio. Before the microphones. Before our lives became searchable files on my mother's hard drive. Back then, she was just weird. Controlling, sure. She'd demand we reenact conversations we had at school so she could monitor for behavioral drift. My brother, Mason, he was 17, once got grounded for 3 weeks after he changed a single word from a lunchtime story. She started calling it verbal integrity training. She said it like it was something noble. Then she caught Mason lying about a phone call with his girlfriend. Just a white lie. He'd said he didn't talk to her that day. Mom called her, confirmed he had, then gave us a 3-hour lecture titled "Secrets Are the Root of Criminal Behavior." That's when she started to spiral. When I turned 14, she found an article online about using audio surveillance to track behavioral issues in teens. I remember how excited she was, holding up a Ziploc bag of tiny black mics and whispering. "These can hear a whisper from across the room." She installed them everywhere. At first, she called it a family communication aid. She said it would help reduce misunderstandings. Then came the quotas, at least 10 minutes of conversation in every room per day, or else we were clearly hiding something. Our 2-story house on Myrtle Avenue turned into a private surveillance lab overnight. Her computer desk, once where she paid bills and checked email, became the command center of her personal CIA. Every Sunday after church, we had mandatory family alignment sessions. She'd play selected clips and ask us to analyze our thought patterns. Week 1, she played me complaining to my younger sister, Lila, about my algebra teacher. I'd said, "I want to scream every time he opens his mouth." She paused the clip and calmly asked, "Let's unpack why Amber feels violent when she receives academic feedback." I had to stand, face an empty chair representing Mr. Lewis, and apologize from the root. That was the beginning of the end for Lila and me. After Mom aired a recording where I called her emotionally needy, she stopped speaking to me altogether. She was 11. Mason moved into the detached garage that winter, thinking it might be mic-free. She had it bugged by Monday. We started writing notes and flushing them. No text messages, no whispers, just toilet paper communiques like we were prisoners of war. Then the rules changed. We were too quiet. Suspiciously quiet. So she added new regulations. Minimum daily conversation quotas per room, mandatory verbal reflections before bed, and no more writing. "Written communication breeds secrecy," she said. I began stuttering that winter. Not dramatically, just enough to make me second-guess every word. She called it evidence the system was working. The night I whispered about a boy I liked, his name was Jaden, was the same night I woke up to her standing over my bed, holding her laptop like a priest with a Bible. She played it for the whole family that Sunday. "Let's explore Amber's unconscious desires," she said with that same eerie smile. Then she made me confess my impure intentions to an empty chair. Jaden didn't even know my name. After that, I stopped talking entirely. Just nodded and used gestures. She hired a speech therapist. Said my silence was a cry for help disguised as rebellion. When I still wouldn't talk, she called a mental health crisis team and claimed I had selective mutism and dissociative symptoms. Said she'd be forced to institutionalize me if I didn't comply with the healing process. So I started talking again, but not about real things. Just made up monologues about what I ate for lunch or how the wallpaper made me feel. It wasn't enough. One day, I found the mic in my ceiling fan and smashed it with a wrench. She replaced it with a new device. Then added motion-triggered cameras in every room. Then came consequence loops, audio recordings she played on repeat in our rooms if we broke rules. 10 hours of myself crying. Over and over. On a loop. Mason cracked during one of those Sunday meetings. She played a clip of him crying after a breakup. He lost it, grabbed her laptop, and shattered it against the fireplace mantel. She called the police, played edited audio that made it sound like he'd been threatening her for weeks. They arrested him that night. After that, she started live streaming our meetings to her church's parenting group. Real-time humiliation. With commentary. She hired someone from the congregation, an IT guy, to transcribe everything. 5 years of our lives turned into folders labeled Lila, emotional manipulation, Mason, anger patterns, Amber, obsessive romantic fantasies. We weren't her kids anymore. We were her experiment. Eventually, someone at church reported the live streams. Child Protective Services showed up. But Mom had planned for this. She told them all our interactions had to be recorded for consistency. When they tried to separate us to talk alone, she refused. Instead, she pulled out a USB drive and said, "I have 50 hours of audio. Evidence of lies, drug discussions, suicidal ideation. If you remove them, every foster home, every judge will get these files. They'll know exactly what kind of children they really are." The caseworker called for backup, but Mom pressed a button on her phone. Everyone's phones buzzed. Emails sent. Transcripts attached. And I knew what was in them. My worst moments. Lila's darkest jokes. Mason's rawest grief. Mom turned our trauma into a data set. "So," she said, arms folded, "you coming home, or should I start distributing?" And just like that, I realized something chilling. She didn't just want us to obey her. She wanted us to be afraid of what we'd said. After the first court hearing, the house felt like a crime scene still occupied by its victims. Mason paced the hallway like a caged animal. Lila stayed curled in the closet, the only space she thought might still be free of microphones. I sat on the stairs, dazed, replaying the moment every adult's phone buzzed with Mom's weaponized USB drive. We thought maybe it was over, that CPS would leave us behind out of fear. But they didn't. 2 days later, they returned with backup, this time with law enforcement, child protection attorneys, and an emergency order. A lead supervisor read it aloud like a declaration. "This residence is under investigation. All surveillance equipment is to be removed. The children are leaving with us." Mom barely blinked. She calmly walked to her computer, opened a folder labeled failsafe, and began typing. "You can take them," she said. "But that won't undo 5 years of documentation. I have everything backed up." She handed a printed inventory to the technician, a spreadsheet of over 3,000 hours of categorized audio. Every child, every topic, every emotional response, labeled, time-stamped, sorted. When the technician tried to shut down her computer, she didn't resist. She just smiled. "Triple back to secure cloud servers. My attorney has access credentials. If anything happens to me, the archive gets distributed." We were told to pack only essentials. I grabbed my notebook, the one Lila and I used to pass notes, our silent rebellion. In it, I found a scribble from months ago. "One day this will all burn." Lila had found hers too. We exchanged a glance. It was time. As we walked toward the front door, Mom followed, still holding her phone like a microphone. Mason is displaying elevated aggression. Amber shows signs of emotional detachment. Lila, classic withdrawal symptoms. Documented previously in sessions dated April 4th, May 16th, and June 11th. The door closed behind us, but her voice lingered in my ears. They separated us immediately. Mason was sent to a group home for boys labeled high risk. Lila went to a trauma-informed foster family that specialized in anxiety disorders. I was placed with a woman named Elise Navarro, a single foster mother who lived above a small bakery. Mrs. Navarro had warm eyes and a quiet voice, but I saw the alert on her phone the moment I walked in. Mom's email had reached her, too. That night, Mrs. Navarro outlined her rules. No locked doors, no electronics after 9 p.m., verbal check-ins every hour. It was clearly meant to make me feel safe, but it didn't. It just felt like more surveillance, this time from someone trying to be kind. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Mason said before we were split up. "If I can get into the system, we burn it all." He'd slipped me a folded sheet of paper before we left, part of our unspoken resistance. That paper was gold, a map of Mom's data infrastructure. Her passwords, cloud accounts, the names of her backup drives. And at the bottom, in Mason's neat handwriting, access code, admin_mother 1990. He'd been preparing for this moment for months. The next morning, while Mrs. Navarro made breakfast downstairs, I opened her laptop and accessed the cloud. Mason's intel was accurate. Folders organized by name. Amber lies. Disobedience. Emotional instability. Mason violence. Anger episodes. Rebellion. Lila control manipulation. Emotional withdrawal. Covert narcissism. Hundreds of recordings. Some were just normal conversations, twisted by how they were labeled. Others were clearly edited, spliced together out of order to sound worse than they were. But deep in the archive, Mason had hidden his own folder. Mom contradictions. Confessions. Verbal abuse. He'd recorded her recording us. Evidence that she knew she was crossing lines. I downloaded everything onto a flash drive Mrs. Navarro had left on the desk. Just as the transfer completed, she returned. She glanced at the screen, then at me. But she didn't ask questions. Later that night, I found a package on my bed. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note. In case you forget what you really are. I plugged it in after midnight. It was a compilation, 20 hours of my most vulnerable moments. Crying, yelling, venting again. Clips of me whispering I wanted to disappear. Saying I hated her. Set to ominous music. Edited to feel like a psychiatric case study. But she made a mistake. The metadata showed everything. Timestamps, file alterations, reordering. She'd tampered with the clips. I saved it all. This time, I'd use her own methods against her. We were each ordered to undergo psychological evaluations in the week leading to the custody hearing. Each evaluator had received Mom's archive in advance. Thousands of transcripts and curated audio clips. The sessions were supposed to be neutral. They weren't. The doctors asked about specific quotes from years earlier. One asked me to explain a joke I made when I was 12, something about disappearing. They weren't evaluating me. They were interrogating me against a script Mom had written. Lila's foster parents had been playing the recordings she came with, just to understand her better. They didn't know it was torture. Mason shut down completely during his evaluation. They labeled him resistant to treatment. His group home had already filed 3 incident reports, each based on behavior that, out of context, could be seen as volatile. The narrative Mom created was becoming reality. Court day came fast. Mom arrived in full costume, conservative blazer, minimal makeup, pearl earrings. Her entourage included 3 lawyers and 2 large briefcases filled with binders. She'd printed our worst moments in color-coded tabs. She didn't look like a monster. That was the terrifying part. She looked like a model parent. The judge, an older woman named Reinhardt, listened quietly as Mom's lawyers presented the recordings. They described Mason as aggressive, Lila as unstable, me as highly deceptive. We didn't even recognize ourselves in the portrayals. But we had help. Our court-appointed attorney, Ms. Clarice Rodriguez, had spent the week compiling our evidence. She filed a formal motion to suppress Mom's recordings, citing emotional abuse and psychological coercion. She submitted our evidence. Mason's secret recordings of Mom editing punishment clips. My USB with the file metadata proving manipulation. Lila's documentation showing how the recordings impacted her treatment. And we had one more asset, Dr. Leona Kim, a clinical psychologist and expert in tech-facilitated abuse. Dr. Kim reviewed everything. Her conclusion was blunt. This was not parenting. It was surveillance warfare. She explained how even the positive recordings were used to manipulate us, how our voices were exploited to build Mom's version of reality. She showed how clips had been trimmed and rearranged, turning typical teenage frustration into supposed mental instability. Mom's lawyers tried to discredit her, but Dr. Kim stayed steady, clinical, surgical in her testimony. The judge asked no questions, just took notes. The night before our second hearing, I lay awake in the guest bed of Mrs. Navarro's apartment, staring at the ceiling like it might start recording. My body still reacted to shadows like they were cameras. Every creak in the hallway sent adrenaline through me. I knew logically I was safe, but my nervous system hadn't gotten the memo. And I kept thinking about flour. When I was 8, I knocked a bag of it all over our kitchen floor. I burst into tears, afraid Mom would scream. But she didn't. She laughed, handed me a dish towel, and said, "It's just a mess, honey. We'll clean it up." That version of her, the one who saw childhood as messy but forgivable, disappeared the year after. She replaced it with transcripts and timestamps. The courthouse smelled the same, old paper and recycled air. But something was different this time. The judge opened the session with new rules. No audio could be played without prior review. All evidence must be submitted in advance and verified for context. Mom froze. Her lawyers fumbled, trying to reshuffle their game plan. Her data presentation, a stack of color-coded spreadsheets and binders, suddenly felt like overkill. Without constant audio stimulation to manipulate emotion, her arguments landed like bricks in water. She tried to explain her methods. These recordings show a timeline of degenerating behavior. Your Honor, my daughter Amber began showing signs of emotional dysregulation. The judge cut her off. Please return to the stand, Ms. Davidson. You'll have a chance to present documentation later. Mom obeyed, but not before shooting me a look. That same patient, pitying smile she wore the day she told us surveillance was for our own good. Dr. Kim took the stand next and dismantled Mom's narrative one file at a time. She brought unedited recordings, played alongside Mom's selectively trimmed versions. A 3-second clip of me saying, "I just want to disappear," was shown in full context. I'd been joking about a school play and stage fright. The courtroom went still. Another clip, labeled Mason's violent outburst, was really him shouting in grief after Mom had played audio of his breakup in front of our entire family. Then came Lila's so-called manipulation. In truth, she was comforting me after one of Mom's staged family punishments. But edited just right, it sounded calculating. The effect was devastating. Dr. Kim explained what none of us had words for. This level of curated emotional abuse is rare. It mimics caring while eroding self-identity. These children weren't raised, they were managed like suspects. Then the social workers and foster families testified. The one who removed us from the home described Mom's recordings in measured, clinical terms. There was a file of Amber sleep-talking about a boy she liked. Her mother forced her to explain it in front of her siblings. It wasn't parenting, it was performance. Mason's group home director admitted they had filed early reports solely based on Mom's USB drops. In hindsight, many of those incidents were mischaracterized. Lila's foster parents looked gutted. We played her recordings thinking it would help us understand her, her foster mom said. Instead, it re-traumatized her. We're so sorry. Then came Mom's last move, her expert witness, a psychologist hired last minute, who'd only reviewed her transcripts. He called us high-risk, emotionally erratic, and non-communicative. Ms. Rodriguez barely had to work. How many unedited recordings did you personally review, Doctor? A pause. None. The courtroom stiffened. Dr. Kim returned with rebuttals, matching the doctor's citations to original files. Every quote had been stripped of context. Every diagnosis relied on Mom's edits. It was methodical deception. During recess, Mom tried to talk to us in the hallway. A bailiff stopped her, but she kept smiling like she hadn't just been exposed. I still love you, she said softly, just loud enough for me to hear. One day you'll understand I was protecting you. But protection never felt like surveillance. Protection doesn't leave bruises in your mind where your voice used to live. Back at Mrs. Navarro's that night, I sat on the carpet with my notebook open. Inside was a page from Lila, written long ago. If we survive this, we write our own story. That was the moment I realized. Mom had archived our lives, but she never listened to who we were. We weren't just her evidence. We were her survivors. And now, we were building a case of our own. The night before Mom's final custody hearing, she mailed USB drives to every teacher, counselor, and therapist we'd ever encountered. She labeled each one with our names and the phrase behavioral archive. Inside, carefully selected, edited recordings, twisted greatest hits of our worst moments, stripped of context and manipulated to sound like mental illness. But this time, not everyone took the bait. When I got to court the next morning, my foster mother, Mrs. Navarro, quietly handed me an unopened envelope. She sent this yesterday, she said. I thought you should decide what happens to it. I didn't even have to open it. I knew exactly what was inside. Next to me, Lila was shaking. My placement listened to it. She whispered, clutching her hands. They think I have an eating disorder now. Said they're going to keep a closer eye on me. You don't, I said. Not yet, she muttered, barely audible. Mason didn't speak at all. He had a new scar near his right eye. Said it was from hitting the bathroom mirror after overhearing his group home discussing one of Mom's emails. Inside the courtroom, Mom arrived with only one lawyer. She looked smaller than I remembered, less like a mother and more like a defendant on the edge of her own undoing. But her eyes were alive with fire. She wheeled in a cart stacked with plastic bins, each one labeled and color-coded. Mason's anger, Lila's emotional regression, Amber's manipulations. Each bin was filled with USB drives, transcribed documents, and pages of handwritten notes. She began her testimony with rehearsed sincerity. Everything I did was for their safety. I monitored their behavior. I cataloged dangerous patterns. I kept records because no one else was watching. The judge stopped her 3 minutes in. All recordings must be reviewed in chambers first. Do not reference materials not approved for this hearing. Mom flinched like she'd been slapped. For the first time, the court wasn't running on her rules. Ms. Rodriguez stood. She submitted the counter-evidence. Audio Mason had secretly recorded, Mom mocking him during punishment loops. Videos of Mom faking emotional breakdowns, narrating for her own recordings. Lila's footage of her foster family discussing her as a psychiatric risk because of Mom's email, not because of her behavior. Then Dr. Kim returned to the stand with her final report. She was calm, methodical, like an autopsy technician dissecting a case of emotional warfare. Out of 3,000 hours of surveillance, she explained, over 94% showed normal adolescent behavior. Only 6% involved any elevated risk, and much of that was a direct response to the surveillance itself. She paused. These children did not need intervention. They needed safety. Then the judge looked directly at Mom. Do you understand how your actions affected your children? There was a moment of silence, too long. Then Mom stood, fingers trembling, but voice sharp. They lied to you, she said. I saved them. Amber said she wanted to disappear. I stopped her. Lila cried herself to sleep. I was there. Mason, he hit me. Mason rose slowly, his face blank. I was trying to break your hard drive. She laughed once, almost like a bark. Because you're violent. No, he said. Because I couldn't take hearing myself cry anymore. Security was called. Mom tried to hand the judge another USB. He refused. She turned to us, shouting our real names. Amelia, Lucas, Tess. Names she hadn't used since we were little. Maybe she thought it would break us. It didn't. The guards escorted her out screaming about false narratives and judicial bias. And for the first time, I realized something horrifying. Even now, she didn't believe she was wrong. She still thought she was saving us. That night, Mrs. Navarro found me at the kitchen table with Mason's USB drive, his backup of everything we'd collected over the years. We sat together sorting files. She showed me how to label them for legal impact. What would count in court? What would prove pattern? It was the same system Mom used. But this time, the purpose was different. We were building a case against control, not reinforcing it. And this time, the voices being preserved weren't just recordings. They were truths. Ours. The sky was gray the morning we went back to court for the final hearing. It hadn't rained yet, but the air felt swollen with pressure, like the storm was holding its breath, waiting for someone to exhale first. I was that someone. Mrs. Navarro held my shoulder as we waited in the hallway. Tess clutched a sketch pad she hadn't let go of in days. Lucas sat beside her, silent, one knee bouncing relentlessly. No one spoke. There were no words left for what we'd endured. The story was already told, filed, recorded, time-stamped, and backed up in triplicate. Now all that remained was the judge's decision. When Mom walked into the courtroom, she looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her church blazer wrinkled at the sleeves. She clutched a thin folder, a far cry from the binders and hard drives she used to carry. Her lawyer looked disheveled and out of place, a last-minute replacement. Most of her team had abandoned the case weeks ago after her arrest for breaking into Tessa's foster home. Still, her eyes scanned the courtroom with the same calculating sharpness. She spotted us and smiled faintly, like none of it had happened. At 9 a.m. Sharp, the judge entered. She sat down, glanced briefly at both sides, and began to read from her prepared statement. Her voice was clear and final. This court finds that the respondent, Deborah Langley, engaged in sustained emotional abuse through covert surveillance and psychological coercion over a period of at least 5 years. I felt the weight lift from my chest in one slow, trembling breath. I didn't cry, not yet. The judge continued, listing the evidence, the manipulation of recordings, the systematic punishment tactics, the misuse of mental health labels to justify control. She cited Dr. Kim's psychological findings, Nathan's raw audio logs, Tessa's recorded foster home interactions, and the edited metadata I had uncovered. She called the surveillance a campaign of control disguised as parental concern. Then came the sentence. Parental rights are hereby terminated, effective immediately. The respondent will have no further legal contact with Megan, Lucas, or Tess Langley. Permanent restraining orders will be issued. All recordings, physical and digital, are to be destroyed under court supervision. Tess let out a sharp breath, eyes wide, as if she hadn't dared hope until that moment. Lucas exhaled through his nose, jaw tight, hands in fists. I just stared ahead, stunned. Mom didn't flinch, but her smile faded. Afterward, she tried to approach us in the corridor, flanked by court officers. When they stopped her, she raised her voice slightly, not to shout, but just enough to be heard. I have the full transcripts, the backups. You'll come back one day. You'll need context. I didn't respond. None of us did. For once, she was talking into silence. 3 months passed. Lucas transferred to a trauma-informed group home where no one judged him for being quiet. They let him walk outside by himself. He told me, during one of our weekly calls, that he'd started sleeping without headphones for the first time in years. Tessa's placement specialized in therapeutic care. Her foster mom signed her up for art classes. She sent me a photo of one of her paintings, a house without walls. And me? I stayed with Mrs. Navarro. She never asked invasive questions. She didn't try to fix me, just offered space. I started school again, got a part-time job at a used bookstore. I spoke to classmates without rehearsing every word in my head. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my room, I talk to myself out loud, just to remember what it feels like. Then one day, it arrived, a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a USB stick, unlabeled. The only other item was a sticky note, in her handwriting. In case they forget who they really are. Mrs. Navarro read the note. She didn't ask what I wanted to do. I held the USB over the kitchen trash can for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just dropped it in. Let her keep her archives. Let her live in the echo chamber she built. Because that's all it is now, echoes. Old sounds with no power. We still have a long way to go. Court-mandated therapy continues. Tess gets overwhelmed in crowded rooms. Lucas still jumps when someone raises their voice. And me? I'm not the girl she recorded anymore. I'm not a file. I'm not a voice on a hard drive. I'm someone she never actually knew. And I'm finally free.